almost like Christmas for some of our students. They've never unwrapped a new present. And that, when we tear up at the same time, I was like, wow, we are able to make that impact. The team worked very hard to make that impact. And I was like, that is what I want to tell.
I feel we impact the students' success because we work with parents and families and students to ensure that any problem, any mediation that we can do to work with the building principal and district leaders to resolve their concerns.
I moved here from India 24 years ago, and I've made it home. I've had 2 children here, raised them here. So many startups. The ecosystem is so rich for technology that I've never had to look for a job, So it is so rich with technology, and it's important for me being in a city like that. And I feel right now in my role, it's especially important for our students because they have tremendous amount of opportunity to go make their careers in technology in the city right now.
For someone considering a career in Columbus City Schools, I would say go for it. This is the best place, and I can honestly say that from the bottom of my heart, to work. Columbus City Schools is a family. You're not going to get a better support system. You're not going to get a better district that's going to encourage your development and really actually provide you the tools to increase your knowledge, to increase your leadership, and to increase your impact.
We are the largest district in the state, so therefore we have more opportunities for educators, and we have a lot more support and a lot more chances for someone, if they want to move up or change careers inside the district, they can.
We are so excited to welcome our students back to the first day of school for the new school year this year, where our theme is Dream Big and Achieve More. We want our students and families to know that our entire staff is ready to welcome our students back and primed and positioned to help them achieve their goals this year.
The first day is the absolute best. It's what we have worked so hard for all summer. We have been preparing and just anxious for the students to come back. We're ready for them to get going and get closer to meeting their goals and being successful here. So we as a staff are very excited on the first day.
I want to thank everyone for coming to the 2024-25 school year. Welcome to the newly updated Scoutwood. I'm so excited to share all of our updates with you guys, and I can't thank everybody who worked so hard to get it done. We had 90 days over the summer to get this done, and they did an amazing job.
Hi, I'm Ansley Stevenson, Capital Improvements Project Manager, and we're back at Mifflin High School. Teachers have returned today, and we're here amidst the hustle and bustle of teachers unpacking and setting up their rooms. We wanted to take you on a guided tour one last time to see the finished product, so come along. We're here in the new Student Support Services area of Mifflin High School. Before, these spaces were scattered throughout the building, and now students and counselors have a private space to access all of those student support services. We're sitting here in one of our 3 new extended learning areas at Mifflin High School. They're all furnished slightly differently to allow a different posture for students and staffs. Some of them are more focused around technology, some of them are more focused around lounge and conversation to allow students and teachers to pick the space that suits their needs for the day. We're standing in one of our completely refreshed classrooms here at Mifflin High School. Throughout, you'll see new flooring, new ceilings, new lighting, our new sound system that allows for an even sound distribution throughout the whole classroom, and furniture that was customized for each teacher to suit their needs. Looking at the refreshed auditorium space, you'll see new seating, new theater curtains, new lighting and sound system to support our next big production here at Mifflin High School. Here in the relocated weight room at Mifflin High School, we have combined the weight room and the health classroom. So you'll see state-of-the-art, new weight equipment combined with flexible furnishings to allow us to use this space for after-school events, as well as after-school weight and strength training. Moving into the art and construction technology spaces, which were both refreshed here, you can see in the art room, we've got completely new seating for 72 students, which supports both of our art classes. We've added a lot of built-in cabinets to support all of those art materials needed to do all of the different studio functions for our high school art students. Looking at our construction technology space, you'll see a brand new dust collection around the perimeter. This will allow us to keep a safe, clean environment to teach our students the critical skills to become part of our modern construction technology world. At this project, we left no stone unturned. As you walk through the building, you will see upgrades throughout. Our hallways have been completely painted, upgrading with new ceilings and new lighting. Our cafeteria space has been refreshed, all new furniture, all new flooring, and all new lighting. Our brand new gymnasium space has been equipped with everything we need for the next big game. We have new bleachers, new basketball hoops, and a completely refinished gymnasium floor. When you walked through Mifflin High School last school year, it was a dark, outdated, uninspiring space for our young learners. When you walk through this year, you'll see a bright, refreshed space that allows our students to dream big and achieve more this school year and many school years to come.
I hope that the students feel a sense of accomplishment. I hope they feel proud about what they created. I hope they feel like they, really can do anything.
I want to dance for the rest of my life because I've been doing it up until now, so I still want to do it forever.
You taught me this in Dance 1, that dance is like a universal language.
And over time, I've really realized that my role here has become not necessarily teaching them about the art form of dance, but using dance as a way to understand yourself in the world. And when you understand yourself, then you are able to do more.
So I can say personally, the connection you have with your students and that you want them to do better. You want them to push. You don't want them to fall under any category. You want them to push forward, and her sense of being a community. I'm about to cry. You can really see that. You want to be a community, and you push for that. You push for your students so they can have a community. I told you dance ensemble is family. So you push for that. You push for the family. You push for us being together, even though times may be hard, the being there, present in time and space, was really something that I appreciate.
Life is gonna go back to normal, and what you gonna do when you look back from 4 years in high school and you didn't still push yourself?
Enjoy the moments, enjoy what you have, be here, be grateful for what you have, because we couldn't have done this, we didn't have to do this, or we probably wouldn't be able to do this.
COVID kind of makes you do things you don't want to do, or forces you outside of your comfort zone a little bit. Be open, be different. It's okay to not just think everything's going to be one way. It's okay to change.
I grow every day, so it's not like I'm just stuck in one position. I've learned a lot about myself through this whole experience.
It takes confidence to be a leader, to be able to step out in front of people and say, you know, this is the way that this should be done. Because you have to be able to take criticism from people that doing that as well, because everyone's looking to you.
If you ask for things, if you are open and you're willing to like put yourself out there just a little bit, that things will come to you.
Challenges do not change who you are. They reveal who you are. And what this has revealed is that during this time of great challenge, creativity still happens. Creativity still emerges. And that has been a very cool thing. So this challenge has not changed who we are, it's just revealed who we are.
Hi, I'm Alex Trevino, Director of Capital Improvements, and we're here at Woodward Park Middle School today to highlight the HVAC improvements we're making at this facility and across the district this summer. So this summer's work is focused on our middle school and high school auto.
Only a freshman, is about to be a sophomore.
Kelsey's here.
Owen's 16, is going to be a junior, and Eden's off at OU.
We're gonna miss Danielle.
So the
and
boys have gotten
Devontae is
big.
leaving
Look
the
at them.
state. Got a new
Aaron's
job.
5'9". He's going to be a beast. He's,
Yeah.
I'm like, you need to be. You're cut and burst. Oh no.
The June 9th meeting of the Policy Governance Committee meeting will come to order. Mr. Williams, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Ms. Ingalls,
Present.
Ms. Adair,
Present.
Mr. Cole,
I am here.
Ms. Ellingson,
Present.
Ms. Lunsford,
Present.
Ms. Smith, Mr. Vogel.
I'm here.
We have a quorum.
And Kyle, on the board doc, the sheet that I'm showing does not have the public comment on it, but I want to make sure that it did get corrected in board docs.
Yeah, public comments here. Do minutes and then public comment.
Okay, so we're going to start with item number 2, which is the approval of minutes. Has everyone had an opportunity to see the minutes from last board meeting? Okay, hearing none, I'll ask for a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Ms. Ingalls,
Yes.
Ms. Adair,
Yes.
Mr. Cole,
Yes.
Ms. Ellingson,
Yes.
Ms. Lunsford,
Yes.
Mr. Vogel.
Yes.
All right.
Motion carries.
And we have amended the agenda slightly to allow for public comment tonight, so hearing no objections, the agenda is approved. We will move on. We are holding public comment tonight. Our committees don't often get a lot of public comment, so I want to explain how this will go for both our committee members and for our community who is here. So we will be following essentially the same guidelines that we do in the board meetings. Every public commenter will get 3 minutes. At the end of your 3 minutes, we will ask that you wrap up so that we can continue on. We do have 9 folks potentially signed up to speak tonight. And so in order to ensure that our community members who sit as part of our committee can do the work that is before this committee, we will be immediately moving from public comment into the discussion of the 3 agenda items and the 3 policies that are on the agenda. So with that being said, I would like to call up first Charlene Boland. Do we have the timer. All right, Charlene, you have 3 minutes. You can begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Ms. Ingalls. Good evening. My name is Charlene Boland. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a parent of a rising third grader now in CCS. During the day, I'm a lawyer, and I represent young people who are in the juvenile legal system and also those who've been transferred to the adult system. LGBTQ students are overrepresented in both of those populations. Although those students make up less than 10% of the general population, they are roughly 20% of those going through juvenile delinquency proceedings each year. We know that once children get entrenched in the legal system, it has reverberations for the rest of their lives. LGBTQ students are also overrepresented in the homeless population. Some estimates are that nearly 40% of unhoused youth are LGBTQ young people, and Black LGBTQ young people experience the highest rates of homelessness. We all know that safe and supportive environments are key to children's success, both in school and academics and in life. But for LGBTQ students, discrimination, being kicked out of their homes for their status, or experiencing mistreatment or fear of mistreatment at home or in school are contributing factors to these statistics. To be clear, the problem is not the young people, it's the lack of safe and supportive environments. Because of this, I am asking this committee to recommend the adoption of Sample Board Policy 2 from the Honesty for Ohio Education Toolkit. If this committee is leaning more towards another policy, such as the one from Neola, I would ask this committee to add 2 key points to that policy. 1, including social work and counseling staff as part of the notification and determination process. They are best equipped to handle these conversations. And 2, an exception to protect students if the young person voices concern about abuse, neglect, or abandonment if a young person's family is notified. These 2 pieces are crucial to being responsive to protecting LGBTQ young people, ensuring their success in the academic setting, and not contributing to their overrepresentation in the juvenile justice and unhoused populations. If it would be helpful to the committee, I did bring copies of places where I think the sample from Neola could be amended. It's not a lot that you would have to do, but I'd be happy to share that with the board, the committee, if that is okay.
That is okay.
Please.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to call Izetta Thomas, who I believe is virtual. Izetta, you have 3 minutes whenever you are ready.
Hi, good afternoon. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you for having me. I wanted to speak directly to the proposed amendment to school closures. And while there are a lot of comments and things that I could address, I would like to focus on one main point. Looking at a policy like this, I think it is really imperative for our district to consider a comprehensive plan, one that is not focused solely on school closures, but one that really looks at a plan to attract, welcome, and retain our students and youth in CCS. Oftentimes, underutilization of buildings or lower enrollment is a really prominent or main focus that our board has had on whether or not to close a school, but it doesn't target the underlying root causes of that under enrollment. One of the things that the Columbus Education Justice Coalition pointed out in 2024, when we were here talking about school closings, was a plan like this. And the fact that CCS, unlike some other school districts across the nation, has a plan that we've seen work when it comes to recruitment and retention of our students. International High School found that they had a number of students in the neighborhood who would be amazing for International, should be at International, And those students were there in the neighborhood, but they were choosing charters. And so that staff went out and canvassed door to door, spoke to families about why they were choosing charters, realized a lot of the families didn't even know about international, let alone the fact that it was in their right in their backyard. And they were able to recruit and retain students that way. We've also done something like this for a number of years in early childhood. Columbus City Schools does an amazing job, and having been in the early childhood department myself, I can say ECE does an amazing job of recruitment and retention of early childhood students, right? And we also know that when students attend pre-K in CCS, they are more likely to attend kindergarten in CCS, which means they are more likely to stay in CCS. But there is not, or at least not to our knowledge in the community, been an overall plan for recruitment and retention of our students throughout the entire district. And I'm sure there are some hot spots, especially when it comes to middle school and high school and those big transitions. So I would implore our board to really consider those things and our superintendent to focus on that. Otherwise, we are going to continue to close schools and close schools and close schools, just as we have.
Thank you, Izetta. We appreciate your testimony. Next, we'll call up Jimmy Beal.
Hello. I am a school counselor in Columbus City Schools and have been since 2004, and have been working with LGBTQ youth since 2004. So this particular area is not only a passion for me, but it's definitely my experience and a calling, if you will. I was going to read to you the sample policy, but we only have 3 minutes. So what I would reiterate is that the changes that we would make to it are small as far as language goes, but significant as far as impact goes. So that if that's reported to any staff, it may be a nurse. Once that person has this information, to be able to then loop in the mental health staff, social worker, counselor, school psychologist, and those individuals would work with the student to determine the appropriate next steps for each particular student's case. So it's a small change, but it has significant impact when we're talking about students and something that's very personal and oftentimes very private. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up, we have Melody Grames.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, my name is Melody Grames. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a school social worker in the district. I work at Whetstone High School and Columbus Spanish Immersion Academy. I also live in the district in Old Town East, right by East High School. I'm here today with others from Pride Warriors and the Columbus Education Justice Coalition to advocate that the policy you are all preparing to satisfy for House Bill 8 is one that is harm reductive and aims to keep our LGBTQIA+ youth safe within our school buildings and our CCS community. Every one of us, empowering every student, reads the banner on the website outlining the board's goals and guardrails. underneath goals of strengthening reading performance, mathematics proficiency, and closing opportunity gaps, specifically through increased OST scores and graduation rates. The banner states that our students will lead the way while being supported by intervention systems and a staff utilizing a culturally responsive and whole child approach. Overall, a very good and clear plan. Putting that plan into practice to see our students achieve academically starts with policies that allow them to be seen, cared for, and safe. Every student, every identity, and every experience. I ask that you use NASW's Example 2 House Bill 8 policy, which some of my colleagues have stated already, as it is harm reductive and aims to keep our LGBTQIA+ youth safe within our school buildings so they can live without fear of being forcibly outed to potentially violent situations, and instead can show up as themselves, safe and ready to learn from our highly qualified teaching staff. Existing in fight or flight is no way to live that is beneficial for our youth academically, socially, emotionally, mentally, or physically. What the board chooses to do with this policy will send a message loud and clear to our LGBTQIA+ youth, their families, the city, and our state. Let this message be that CCS supports LGBTQIA+ youth and their community, that CCS is a place where all students can learn, achieve, and grow, that the district is not scared to show true allyship. We have had students leave the district due to the Infinite Campus name change disaster this spring. Well, everyone is waiting to see what the district does to follow that up. Will you step up to keep our students safe from further harm and emotional turmoil through forced outing? Or will you accept a policy that puts some of our most amazing and incredible but vulnerable students at risk? Martha P. Johnson, LGBTQIA+ activist of the 60s and 70s, said, "History isn't something you look back at and say it was inevitable. It happens because people make decisions that are sometimes very impulsive and of the moment, but those moments are cumulative realities." Happy Pride.
Next, we'll call up Stephen Hardwick.
Thank you, Chair Engels. Stephen Hardwick. I have, for the first time in 10 years, I only have one kid in the district now. That one's graduated. I also have a sophomore at Whetstone. And I'm here to ask you that you're going to have a choice here. You can look at the policy and pick up the policy and pick a policy that you think the General Assembly, that the bigots who wrote this bill want you to pass, or you can pick the most kid-friendly policy that you could defend in court or that you could defend to the public. And that's what I asked you to do. The district has shown that it's willing to go to the mat in order not to give busing to private school students. You've been fighting that in court. I applaud the effort you're making on that, but could you give at least the same amount of effort and determination for the LGBTQ+ kids in the district? And a couple things that people keep talking about why it's important to have counselors, not principals, do it. As a parent, this is the kind of thing I would expect from a counselor. Principals are the rules people. They're the people who keep the building running as a whole. They're not the people who deal with individual matters of student well-being. They're not the people trained on how to balance confidentiality and disclosure, which is exactly what they have to do here. This is a counselor skill. This is why you hire counselors. It's not why you hire principals. I love the principals my kids have had. They're great at what they do, but this is not what they do. And I'm glad to see that there are a couple LGBTQ+ youth who might be willing to speak tonight, and I think that's one of the things that's been missing in these conversations. It's been very hard for the kids to come forward, so it's been left to the adults to take the lead on it, and I would love to be a time when we adults were no longer taking the lead on this. And I ask you to I don't know what they're going to say, but I ask you to give them a strong listen, and what they say is more important than what I say, and if they say something different, please listen to them. Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Carrie Kendersky. I'm sorry.
You would be in the minority if you got it right. So.
Almost.
Hi, and thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. My name is Carrie Konzerski. I'm a parent of 2 kids in the district. I'm a licensed independent social worker who primarily works with trans and queer folks. And I'm a member of Columbus Education Justice Coalition's new Pride Warriors team, created to advocate for the LGBTQIA+ students in the district. House Bill 8 puts trans and non-binary students at serious risk by forcing schools to out them even when it's unsafe. This forced outing could place a student at risk of abuse, neglect, or abandonment. Every student deserves a supportive school environment, but HB 8 takes that away. This is fundamentally a mental health issue, one of life and death. Trans and queer youth already face alarmingly high rates of depression, self-harm, and suicide, and those risks grow when they are denied safety, support, and affirmation. This isn't just theory. The statistics are heartbreaking. Over 1.8 million queer and trans young people seriously consider suicide every year in the US. Specifically for trans and non-binary youth, the Trevor Project found that almost 50% seriously considered suicide. Queer and trans youth are more than 4 times as likely to attempt suicide as their peers, with at least 1 attempt every 45 seconds. That means 4 queer or trans youth will attempt suicide during the 3 minutes I speak today. Anti-trans laws like HB 8 make things worse. These laws increase suicide attempts amongst trans youth by up to 72%. After HB 8 passed, the Rainbow Youth Project received 1,134 calls from Ohio in 9 days, compared to 284 in a typical month. 1/3 of queer and trans youth are rejected by their parents, and those youth are 8 times more likely to attempt suicide. As a social worker who spent years working with unhoused adults, I saw far too many trans people on the streets struggling with addiction, illness, and trauma, often after being rejected by their families. The truth is, some parents kick their kids out just for being trans. No policy can undo the harm of House Bill 8, but you can adopt one that reduces that harm. This harm reduction approach complies with the law while providing stronger protections for trans and non-binary students. It won't fix everything, but it can make a critical difference in their safety, mental health, and trust. Every time an adult stands up for our trans students, it sends a clear message. Every trans student in our district, like all of our students, deserve their humanity acknowledged and respected. I urge you to adopt Sample Policy 2, as others have stated. We did make one tiny little adjustment, so I have copies if it's okay to hand them out in a minute. And the last thing, if you could provide a timeline as to what things are going to look like, because we have a July 1st deadline. There's only one regular school board meeting. The meeting on, the 26th is typically a close of books. So I'm assuming that there might be the first reading on the 17th, with the second being waived. It would be really helpful for the public to know, so we can know how best we can give our feedback. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Is it okay if I get those?
Yeah. Thank you. All right, next we have Liz Chapman.
Good evening. Thank you all for your hard work this past school year. My name is Liz Chapman. I live in the Hilltop and am a parent to a rising Fort Hays sophomore and a rising 7th grader at CGA. Our family moved to Columbus 3 years ago, and we purposely chose to live in the city and send our kids to CCS. I'm speaking about the proposed update to the school closure policy and kind of the processes around school closures. The main thing I want to talk about is that the new policy should require the district to be transparent about the effects that closing a school will have on district finances. This is something that was really missing from the last round of the task force. How will closures affect the budget when you consider added transportation costs, loss of students to charters and vouchers, and any anticipated staff attrition? I'd like to see something really concrete, like what you did with the levy, when the district listed like the exact number of staff and programs that would be saved by passing the levy, and then the ones that would be cut if the levy doesn't pass. The community needs to see exactly what they would get out of closing a school, and on the flip side, a recognition of the documented harms that school closures have on communities. This will not only allow the community to make informed decisions, but will give us the ability to hold you accountable to your promises. There is little to no community trust that this realignment process will deliver the additional programs and opportunities promised in presentations to the board, unfortunately. So in addition to this transparency, other robust cost-saving alternatives must be presented to the community. We should have the ability to decide. And all of this information must be provided well in advance of community input sessions to give us time to digest and provide high-quality feedback. The communication we receive around school closures must be as robust and repetitive as the communications we get for School Lottery and Pathway Express. I'm not sure if you know, but during the school lottery season, parents receive multiple phone calls and emails per day. And I would love to see that kind of energy around communication regarding closures. The last item of concern stems from presentations I've seen at board meetings. There seems to be an implied correlation between updated facilities and student outcomes, and I've not seen any research that supports that. I've also not seen that anecdotally in CCS. Rather, it's the staff and school climate that are much more important. We can't just put kids in nicer buildings and assume they'll have better experiences. I did submit all of this in my feedback form, and I really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
All right, next we have Kristen Bugla. I'm sorry if I butchered your last name.
I just want to first say thank you to everybody here, as well as to all the members of the board for willing to open this up for public comment. This is going to be a bit more ad-libbed than I had first planned, so I apologize if it seems a little scattershot. My name is Kristen. I am a resident of Columbus and have been for several years, and I am a former trans student, now trans adult. And I wanted to speak a little bit about my experiences, especially in this conversation about what language is acceptable and which language is going to be the most helpful for trans youth, especially facing the kind of opposition that they're facing in the State House today. As a young trans youth, I did not feel accepted at home, and I certainly did not feel accepted at school. And the combination of that made me feel incredibly isolated and incredibly disconnected from my wider community and from the people in my life. And I don't mean to make it all about me. I don't think that's important here. I think what's important is what we can do for students now. The alternative language that can be found, that has been suggested, and I will say that I support, will not solve that issue, and I can't say that I support every single piece included in it because much of it is still based on HB 8 and its original passing. However, it will help mitigate that issue, and it will show a sign of support from the members of the board and the members of this committee to the LGBTQ community, and showing that there is an understanding of what kind of harms can be committed. There's been a lot of talk, especially about the impact that this can potentially have on those who are experiencing unsafe home environments, and I really want to underline that point. Nearly 52% of queer youth experience some form of rejection or some form of unsafe home environment. Nearly 6 in 10 trans youth are not out to their families, and I'm certain that that includes many in our school district. The simple fact is that this policy, even if it is mitigated, will cause harm. But the best that we can do, and the best that we can all try to accomplish, is to mitigate that harm. And it is my belief that that is what this language will do. So I once again implore the members of this committee and the members of the board to please adopt that language as soon as possible. Thank you so much for your time.
Carl. And I believe that concludes our public comment. Did you sign? Carl, can you confirm who we have missing?
Is that Perry? I think we skipped him by mistake. His name wasn't called.
Perry Karaman?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, please. And Stu, you said, okay.
Thank you. My name is Perry Carmen. I've lived in Columbus for most of my life, and I am a proud community member. A couple months ago, I got involved with Columbus Education Justice Coalition and Pride Warriors because I believe in this district. Even though I don't have kids in this district, I believe in Columbus City Schools. It is a district that I hope to send my own kids to because I believe in the ways in which Columbus City Schools reflects the values of this city. I am so excited to see the ways that this city has grown over the years, as well as what's to come. Recently, Columbus was named the second largest growing city in the United States, and the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission anticipates that over the course of the next 25 years, the Central Ohio region will see a growth of up to 726,000 people. With new population growth comes new opportunities for our entire city, including our school district. Columbus City Schools has the chance to not only reflect the values of our growing population, but also bring families back to CCS who have left. With the pieces of policy that fellow speakers and I are advocating for, we are putting the emotional safety of children in this district at the forefront while acting in line with best practices. Trans kids deserve dignity, and I hope that their schools can provide that dignity. Families should not have to look to the suburbs or charter schools to find a school that will support their kids. The aforementioned policies help to provide that support and afford further opportunities for CCS to help students feel valued, held, and respected. The City of Columbus is entering a new era, and I hope that CCS can stand up to be a model district throughout that growth. Thank you.
And Stu, we'll call you up. I think you are our last public speaker. Okay.
Good evening, committee members. Although she's not in the room, let the record show that Kelsey is the real MVP. I'm Stuart McIntyre, graduate of the district. I have two young children, 2.5 and 8 months, that will be CCS students one day. I'd like to make public comment on the school closing policy. Starting with why the school closing process last year faced so much community opposition. I would chalk that up to a starting point of very low public trust, a lack of clear rationale in the eyes of many people, with no immediate plan for families whose schools were proposed to close, a rushed process led by a hand-picked task force, a lack of transparency and community engagement in that process, as well as some attempts by certain board members to silence public criticism. But particularly the fact that the discussion was not connected to a vision of broader transformation and how to grow the district. Because the truth is the problems that the board was responding to and the task force was responding to are real. I graduated from Centennial in 2008, and since then the district has lost more than 10,000 students in its enrollment. But the question cannot just be how to manage decline, but how to reverse decline. And as I mentioned to the board in June, on behalf of the Columbus Education Justice Coalition of last year, the likeliest outcome of the mass closings would be thousands of frustrated families leaving the district for homeschool, charters, or private school vouchers, resulting cuts and layoffs from decreased enrollment, further division among district and community stakeholders, and loss of trust, and in short, a downward spiral for Columbus City Schools, which I don't think any of us want. So what's a different path when considering this new policy? Any closing of schools and repurposing of buildings must be connected to a transformative vision of the district's future, a vision that, if it exists, is not yet fully understood and believed in by the community. So what if starting the conversation with a school closure policy is already a step in the wrong direction? Why not launch a facilities master plan process centered around revitalizing and transforming the district, incorporate renovations and new builds into the conversation, expanding pre-K, gathering community input for future building use where academic programs are being closed? Why not launch a marketing and recruiting department to celebrate this district's successes and recruit families? As Isaiah Thomas mentioned, the experience at Columbus International may be instructive. Why not make plans to scale up the proven community schools model as well as other district initiatives in their pilot phase or that have not yet expanded to more buildings? Why not launch a citywide collective impact organization to garner funds and support from nonprofit, government, and private sector leaders? And why not lean hard on City Hall and the corporate community with the community labor unions and advocacy groups at your back to fill the financial gaps being created by the State House? So, I'm at my time, but I would just say, CCS has the deck stacked against it, right? You all did not create all the problems that you're trying to respond to as a board, as a committee. But how can we come together How can we actually put forward a vision for the future of the district? And how can that be the way that the community receives a conversation that's difficult, decisions that are hard about facilities and the future of the district? And I hope that this board and administration will lead the way and engage with all of us.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. All right, so the committee will go ahead and move into the first policy for consideration, which is policy 5780.01, the Parents' Bill of Rights, House Bill 8 policy requirement. Before we begin, I do want to thank everybody who came and presented today to our committee. We hear you, we're listening to you. And I also want to express that I always speak for myself in this manner because I do not have authority to speak on behalf of the Board of Education really at any time. That authority is vested with our president, and he's here in an individual capacity as well as a member of this committee. So I would say me as a board member, although I feel very confident that many, if not all of my board colleagues are very dedicated to making sure that we put forward policy that is good for our students, protects our students, protects our staff in their role day to day, and that we know the environment that we're in right now. And it can be sometimes difficult to navigate, and especially with the individuals that are being impacted by the decisions made by individuals both at the state and national level. So I want to call that out and to recognize that and kind of go through a little bit about what House Bill 8 is. I did ask that the committee review the legislation that was passed last year that set forth the requirement that a Board of Education adopt a policy on the Parents' Bill of Rights bill. And so for purposes of the public, I'll just briefly go through some of the requirements that this law has put on boards of education. And we do have until July 1st to get a policy in place. Policy 5780.01 has had a first reading with the Board of Education that occurred earlier this year in March, at the end of March. And so we are, as a board, at a stage where we can do a second reading of that policy and have more robust discussion around what that policy should entail. And so I think with this committee's guidance, what we're hoping to accomplish in the conversation today is to give some credence to not only the testimony that we've heard today, but also the research and reading that you all have been doing on this policy, on this topic, and make sure that we make a recommendation to the Board of Education for their discussion, for the board's discussion. That is one that is community-centered, but also realistic with what it is that we are facing with this current law. So the Parents' Bill of Rights is an act that the General Assembly put forward late last year that maintains that a parent has fundamental rights to make decisions concerning the upbringing, education, and care of the parent's child. It requires public school districts to develop and adopt a policy that promotes parental involvement in the public school system by providing parental notification on student health and well-being and instructional materials that contain sexuality content. Under the Act, a parent includes either the natural or adoptive parents of a student or a court-appointed guardian. Schools must adopt a policy by July 1st, 2025, and make the policy publicly available and post in a prominent place on its publicly accessible website if it has one. That second portion we always do. It is always on our board docs. Sexuality content is defined in law as any oral or written instruction, presentation, image, or description of sexual concepts or gender ideology provided in a classroom setting, and it excludes from the definition of sexuality content instruction or presentations in sexually transmitted infection education, child sexual abuse prevention, and sexual violence prevention education provided by public schools, and incidental references to sexual concepts or gender ideology occurring outside of formal instruction or presentations on the topics. Under the policy, public schools must ensure that sexuality content is age-appropriate and developmentally appropriate for the age of the student receiving the instruction, regardless of the age or grade level of that student. So what that means is if you have a young student in a grade that's older than them, it has to be age-appropriate, and that's what I would anticipate that they mean. I am not our legal counsel, and I'm not intending to advise the district in a legal counsel capacity. I'm just reading the words. Further, prior to providing instruction that includes sexuality content or permitting a third party to do so, school must provide parents an opportunity to review any instructional material that contains sexuality content. There are more requirements under the law about parental notification. And so under the Act, each parental involvement policy must require schools to adopt a procedure to obtain authorization from parents prior to providing any type of healthcare service to the student. Under the procedure, schools must notify parents at the start of the school year of the healthcare services offered by or facilitated in cooperation with the school and their option to withhold consent or decline any specified service. And the Act clarifies that the parental consent to healthcare services does not waive the parent's right to access the parent's students' educational or health records, or to be notified about a change in the student's services or monitoring. There are requirements for notification that includes when there are substantial changes to a student's services or monitoring related to the student's mental, emotional, physical health, or well-being, including counseling services or the school's ability to provide a safe and supportive learning environment. The notice must reinforce the parent's right to make decisions regarding the upbringing and control of their child, and note the school will not limit their access to the school's student education and health records. The Act defines students' mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being to include, at a minimum, students' academic performance, any significant sickness or physical injury or psychological trauma suffered by a student, any harassment, intimidation, or bullying by or against a student in violation of school policy, any request by a student to identify as a gender that does not align with the student's biological sex, which is defined as the biological indication of male and female, including sex chromosomes, naturally occurring sex hormones, gonads, and unambiguous internal and external genitalia presented at birth without regard to an individual's psychological, chosen, or subjective experience of gender. And 5, the exhibition of suicidal ideation or persistent symptom of depression or severe anxiety or other mental health issues. Under the Act, a school's policy must prohibit school personnel from directly or indirectly encouraging a student to withhold from a parent information about the student's mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being, or a change in services or monitoring related to the student's health. There are provisions in the law regarding the submission of written concerns, where a parent has the right to file a written concern, and the principal or assistant principal must resolve the concern within 30 days of its receipt. There are also general retentions of parental rights that says the Act states that it does not prescribe all rights of parents or preempt or foreclose claims or remedies in support of parental rights that are available under the Ohio Constitution, Ohio Revised Code, or Ohio Common Law. The Act also states that a school's policy does not require disclosure or activity that conflicts with or violates HIPAA, state law governing the use or disclosure of protected health information by specified covered entities, confidentiality privileges established under continuing law for attorneys, physicians, psychologists, and certain other mental health professionals, the FERPA, Federal Education Rights and Privacy Act, the rights of crime victims under the provisions of state law and the Ohio Constitution, known as Marsy's Law. The Act also states that it does not require disclosure or activity in violation of any court order, including a condition or bond or protection order or consent agreement issued pursuant to continuing law, or a condition of community control sanction, post-release sanction, or parole. Finally, the act states that it does not prohibit or limit career and academic mentoring and counseling between teachers and students in the regular course of the school day. All right, that's a lot to throw at you. And this, with law changes, it is always difficult. And so I want to pause and make sure that our committee understands what it is that we're being asked to do, what the law changes require, and to the extent that we can answer any of those things to prepare to have this conversation about the policy. I just want to take a pause there. So, any questions or concerns?
Just a quick confirmation, Madam Chair. Thank you. The section of House Bill 8 that refers specifically to religious exemptions and particularly religious release for instruction, that is in another policy of ours?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, so President Cole raises a great point. House Bill 8 had 2 topics within it. You are supposed to have 1 topic in a bill. But the other piece of House Bill 8, which has already been handled by our Board of Education through a policy that is adopted earlier this year, is the release time religious instruction, RTRI, as it is known in the field. And that act, that came from House Bill 8, and it required, instead of permitted, that school boards adopt a policy authorizing students to attend release time for religious instruction. The board did so in March, and that policy is currently available on the board docs website. So we are not talking about that specific portion of House Bill 8 today, because there is a policy in place. Whether that we readdress that policy at a later date is a conversation that is worth having. But today, what we are specifically looking at is the Parents' Bill of Rights requirement and language. Thank you for that question.
Oh, thank you. That's policy 5223, our 5,000 series, but yeah, thank you. I just wanted to make sure.
Any other questions or concerns?
Chair Ingalls, could I ask, I think there was a question in the public comment about the process that the board hopes to go through, and sort of if there's a deadline of July 1st, what that means for what you're hoping from this committee today, and whether you're only looking for comments specifically tailored to this first reading of the 5780.01 draft, or whether the committee is interested in looking at these other policy drafts and how that fits.
That is a great question. I think what, the board agendas are controlled by the president in consultation with the superintendent. So I would eventually refer here to our president about how he would like to see this move forward, and our vice president, board member Adair. But what I was envisioning is that this conversation would need to happen today, because this is the first policy governance committee meeting that we've had since the first reading of the last policy. And the intent would be to come to that board meeting ready to discuss if we can amend this policy appropriately, if there are any amendments to be made, and I know that many were suggested tonight. And then the additional policies that I asked the committee to look at were 2 draft policies that a very large coalition of advocates put together, including the National Association of Social Workers, which is where I asked you to go to the website and pull those 2 policy drafts. But Honesty for Ohio Education was mentioned, and there are many other groups within that coalition. So for sake of not accidentally leaving someone out, I'm not going to try to list that. But there are a lot of advocates that came together, analyzed the Neola policy, which is the first policy that the board has looked at, and thought through some of the questions that were raised in public comment and that we have discussed and heard when this bill was going through the legislature is, if you're going to be notifying, how does that notification take place, and what protocols and protections can you put in place in order to make sure that we're setting both our students and our families up for success for that conversation, whatever that conversation ends up looking like. So I think some of those concerns had been raised in some of the recommendations. So I anticipate, and as long as our board president is okay with this, that we would retake up this policy, but if there were specific portions of the recommended policies or amendments that we would want to make, or if this committee says, get rid of the Neola policy, what we're saying is the NASW, I would just need to know what specific parts of that we would really want, so that I can explain that to the board of, is it possible to amend this such that it complies, or what is the recommendation? I guess that's really an open-ended question of the committee. Board President, would you mind just kind of sharing how you envision that going as far as
Sure.
timeline?
So to speak to the vast majority of what you stated, my interest is to ensure first and foremost that we have taken in fullest consideration possibly what our community wants, what are their aspirations, and what are they calling for. The second piece is that this committee has landed in a space to recommend language to the board that gives us the fullest breadth of that will and intent, if I'm making any sense. And from there, be able to have a conversation at the table to deliberate on where it is that we want to go with this in the healthiest way to represent students.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Any other questions or thoughts?
So I have some questions and thoughts, I guess. First, again, speaking for myself as an individual board member, I do think that protecting the rights of all of our students and not creating environments that are unsafe is always, always the utmost priority for myself. As a mother of a high school student who is questioning and trying to figure out who she is, experiencing bullying, and I understand this as a parent as well. And so making sure that our kids are number one. I would like to know, maybe from our legal counsel or Chair Ingalls, I know you've taken a deeper dive into the law itself. Some of the requests and some of the language that have shown up in these sample policies, which I have reviewed, seem to request the board to do things that I'm not sure the law itself allows. And I'm wondering if there is discretion under the law, as we are reading it, to allow for amendment of, for example, who is making the report, who is involved. I have read this about 5 times, and I know that principal is mentioned in terms of notification, and it doesn't say designee. And so I'm just wondering what we think, how much we feel like we can do things that are being suggested, because I would like to do things that they are suggesting, in terms of making sure that we are being compliant with the law as written. Because it'd be my interest in making sure that when conversations are happening, which I think is the intent of the General Assembly, that those are being done in a very safe way for our student. I know that there's some additional comments and questions from that came up about the ability to not share information. To me, that's a little harder with the reading of the law itself. But I would like us to discuss that if we can and if that's appropriate.
Madam Chair, and are we discussing it, because there's certain things, so for example, if there is an issue with a child that is reported, so for example, if there's someone who is concerned about a child being outed because of some kind of previous experience with a parent or guardian, that could then put that child in questionable situation or condition. Staff are required by law, both federal and state, to report that. They're required by law to report, period. Children's Services has to be contacted. I have personal experience with having had to do that in protection for another child.
Authorities do, but parents directly, that's the concern.
But this is where I'm going with that. If the parent is that person in question who otherwise would harm or bring hurt, injury to that child, detriment in some way to that child, we're still required by law to report to the proper authorities what it is that we know for them to then be able to intercede. Is that correct?
Yes.
How does that work with what's been suggested and what is in front of us right now?
Well, assuming for the sake of argument that it is the parent, there's the concern in regards to child abuse or neglect or potential or threatened child abuse or neglect. This particular statute, House Bill 8, does not address that.
Correct.
But there is a statute that does address it, which does include mandatory reporting. So if there's a concern that a kid may be threatened or harmed, then the statute does require the mandatory reporter to contact Franklin County Children's Services or the police department. So there's always a requirement to report to someone, even if there's no requirement to report to the parent under those circumstances.
But doesn't this make it required that we have to report to the parent?
Yes, but I think it does, and I'll read
Yes, it does.
specific language. The policy shall prohibit school district personnel from discouraging or prohibiting parental notification of and involvement in decisions affecting a student's mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being. However, that language does not negate the existing statute, which also protects kids from their own families.
Mandatory reporting.
There is a requirement. One might ask, well, what happens when the counselor, teacher, principal reports to Franklin County Children's Services? What does it do? Can it investigate without contacting the parent? And that's a hard question to ask. From my standpoint, you can. That's part of the investigation.
Correct.
But that normally, that happens right now. I guess what what they're making us write, though, is that we have to notify the parent, which we don't do. We call Children's Services, and then that process happens as is. We're not talking about that process, but this seems to say that regardless of that, the parents have a right to know that, you know, they came in crying to the counselor about something, you know, and we need to have services with them, and they want to, you know, and it could be, it's more than just LGBTQ identity stuff as well. It could be anything. This seems to say that doesn't matter. We still have to call the parent. So that's my question. Like, understanding that we could be putting our own kids in danger, and we do have mandatory reporting. My question is, this seems like it doesn't allow us to at all consider the well-being of our students.
Right, and I can't give you that clear-cut answer.
Right.
Because there are the two statutes, the House Bill 8 statute, as well as the other statute which talks about.
Do we have a policy around that other statute about mandatory reporting?
Yes.
We do?
8462.
Well, so can I just ask?
Which pretty much parrots the statute that I was referencing, 2151 6.421 is the statute that I was referencing, and that statute is quoted or paraphrased within district or board policy.
So, I mean, I guess I want to just start from the perspective of, I understand the concerns of folks in the room about the need to protect students who are at risk of harm if information about them is disclosed to their parents. You know, looking at this, I don't want to jump past what the statute may or may not require. You know, it appears that there's like these exceptions in the statute around HIPAA privacy rule, Ohio Constitution protection of victims' rights. And I'd be curious if our legal counsel viewed those as allowing us the space to protect students who are clearly at risk of harm or abuse or neglect, with an exception of the kind that the folks in public comment suggested. So that would be one question. And I don't know that we know I'm not sure if you all know the answer, have thought that through yet, but if you have any thoughts that you want to share with the committee, I'd be encouraging you to do so.
The exceptions listed in the statute
Correct.
are not applicable to notification to parents.
Okay.
So the exceptions to the statute say, I think they are applicable to the disclosure, because it says, F1 says, nothing in this section shall require disclosure or activity that is in conflict with any of the violation of any of the following. And then section C, I think, is what you're referring to, the section, maybe this is what you're referring to, 2317.02, 4732, 5122. So the language explicitly says, nothing in this section shall require disclosure or activity that is in conflict with any violation of the following. So if any of these sections that are listed, which I believe you've just given a summary of what some of that is, and that includes mandatory reporting and making the certain reports, if that would require you not to tell a parent, then that would that would forbid the disclosure. But what you're saying is none of them say that.
Yeah, I think it would be arguable that it would apply to school psychologists, but not social workers, because of their.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert in HIPAA, but I mean, you know, and sort of, there's like HIPAA rule about how you can make decisions as a covered entity about who you're disclosing information to when you're concerned about abuse and neglect. I'd also be interested whether, a student who is subject to abuse or neglect would be a crime victim deserving of protections under the Ohio Constitution.
Yeah, well, first, HIPAA is not applicable. It's FERPA.
Well, HIPAA is listed here in section A.
But HIPAA doesn't apply to the school district. We're under FERPA.
Okay.
Those are the privacy rights under school districts. And parents have the same FERPA rights as the students. And in fact, FERPA was initially written for parents.
So is that the school nurse as well? Is not under HIPAA, under FERPA?
Everyone's under FERPA in the school district.
Are our providers, like Children's Hospital, under HIPAA?
For their own purposes, they are, but for our purposes, they have to comply with HIPAA. I'm sorry, FERPA. Every contract that we have with a vendor for medical purposes or otherwise, it's FERPA.
So then my question would be, when we're talking about the notification, when it says the board will promptly notify a student's parent of any substantial change, is there a definition of promptly? Or is that subject to?
It is not
interpretation?
defined. It is not defined in the statute.
Yeah. Okay, so then there is no direct definition as into if a child in CCS discloses to a staff member that they are aligning with a gender that's different from birth, that there is nothing that says that my criminal justice mind, there's no chain of custody, right? Is there any outline as to who has to be notified? Because I notice it says the board will promptly notify, but then such notification will be provided by the student's building administration. But where is that link, as in from notification to who notifies who to be able to notify, and how long that takes, and with promptly as the definition?
Statute doesn't define it.
But the way that it's practiced in school districts is that we all have student information and family information housed in what's called a SIS, a Student Information System. For this district, it's Infinite Campus. Within that Infinite Campus system, all contacts that are legal contacts. So for example, as someone who's been a practicing principal, right? If dad was not listed as a parent of contact, was not listed as a parent with actual parent authority, legal authority, if something happened and dad called, I can't tell dad what's going on with that kid. It's one of the toughest parts of the job. You can't really speak to that parent. If you don't know that they're a guardian and they're listed in the system, maybe grandma or granddad is the actual guardian and you speak to them. Maybe you have to contact and you call the house, but you're speaking to mom, and mom is not listed as the guardian, but maybe her mother or father is. Then I can say, look, can you put me in contact with your parents so that I can speak to you about child X? That's how it works. So yeah, the way we find that information is that it is housed in a student information system. We use Infinite Campus. Some other schools use that. Some other districts use Power School. But yeah.
Okay, so then Timmy notifies the librarian or the custodian. They put it in the system. Yes? No?
Timmy says something to the custodian about something happening
Correct.
to him.
Yes.
That custodian would very likely and be required to go to the building administrator and say something to the building administrator, make an official report. Then they'll follow up. The administration will follow up.
I was trying to have a conception on notification, that process. So librarian, student speaks to librarian speaks to school administrator. That's how it goes into that system. Then the school administrator is then required to promptly notify. Got it. Okay.
And based on the situation, if it is one where a child is endangered because of a parent or guardian, then Children's Services is promptly, immediately, swiftly notified.
Kyle and James, I want to give you a break to interject anything that you're hearing that you would like to address.
Just going back to the definition of promptly, and it depends on, I think it depends on the situation. Generally, whether it's in legal terms or layman terms, it's as soon as possible. And so what would, I think in any given situation, it would require the village working together, whether it's a notification, whether the student notifies the social worker, librarian, lunch lady, then they get together to figure out how to notify or what that notification will be. Now, I would say that prompt notification, as would be defined by the legislature, and depending on what statute you look at, promptly is defined differently. But generally, it's as soon as possible. So there can't be a delay in notifying the parent. And that's the gist of the entire statute. There shouldn't be a delay. The parent should be involved at the outset.
I want to raise, so actually, one of our advocates helpfully handed out this one-page form.
Yes.
That has some language on it. So the language, from what I can tell, is pulled in consultation with what is, I'm calling it the NASW draft policy. I know there's a giant coalition of folks, so the policy draft number 2 that you all were sent for consideration. I want to take the second piece of it first. And so, Mr. Barnes, correct me if I'm wrong, but the notification piece of who has to make the notification to the parent, I don't think is specified in law.
It is not.
It's just that the notification that has to occur.
Yes, as Vice President Adair mentioned, throughout the statute, it does reference principal. It also references assistant principal. So that's an indication that one or the other should be involved.
Should be involved, but not necessarily that they have to be the one who initially says it. But to President Cole's point, for purposes of knowing what's going on in the building, that's good practice. I think my point is, I think some of the advocates have raised and some of our own staff have raised concern about making sure that our counseling and social work staff are involved through the process and specifically involved to provide the support services that we can provide to not only the student, but to the family member as that notification is occurring. And so I want to take the second part of the recommendation first. I'm looking at from the language that says such notification will be, and then the added in language is determined and provided by the student's building. They've crossed out administration, and so it would say building, counseling, or social work staff through email and or telephone or in-person conference. I think what I'm hearing for you, Mr. Barnes, is concern about not including the administration in that. But I think what I'm hearing is that our community wants counseling and social work staff involved in that process and part of that notification. And then they've also crossed through the email and or piece and just left through telephone or in-person conference. And I think some of the things that I've been reading about and learning about is that a telephone or in-person conference would be a better mechanism of notification than an email, which who knows if they see the email, if they read the email, how they understand the email, allowing for that facilitation and that conversation with our licensed professionals who can help guide that conversation from a mental health perspective might be a good recommendation.
I do not have the document that you're referring to.
Yeah.
But as far as email versus telephone call versus in person, I would say all three.
What's our standard practice currently? Because we do this. I mean, we do notify parents when, things are happening, at school. What is the standard practice how administrators, counselors are involved in talking to parents, especially like in crisis situations?
I do not know the standard procedure.
Is there a staff person here?
Mr. Brown, can you speak to any of that? Okay.
I mean, because I don't want anyone to interpret this discussion that we're having as like we're trying to evade something. The truth is, every day our schools are doing this, right? And our parents are getting contacted, and we want parents involved. I think that we are very focused on making sure parents know what's going on in a timely fashion. But again, if our students are we know our students are in danger by sharing information, that's where we come over to the mandatory reporting and those kind of protections. So I also don't want to make it feel like we're trying to do something sneaky here when we're not. The truth is, we do have things that are working in buildings, and I would love to know what those best practices are as we are communicating with our families. And maybe that's something that for CCS, we need to make sure is in our policy because we already know it works.
And this is anecdotal, but there are some parents that will not pick up the phone.
Yes.
There are some parents that are not going to accept a visit or come to the school, and there are other parents that will never read their email. So I think that's the reason why I say all three would be appropriate. You have a better chance of reaching the parent.
Does the statute require a specific form of notification?
The statute does, I believe, includes email and telephone call.
And Madam Chair, could we say, provided by the student's building administration with counseling or social work staff? So it's administrator and social worker and administrator and counseling staff. And then also, Mr. Barnes, I wanted to ask, the recommendation to put, except if the student reports concerns that they will incur abuse, neglect, or abandonment due to disclosure to their parents. Is that possible if we are able to do an exception, or do we put a period at the end of student, supportive learning environment for the student period, and then say, if the student reports concerns that they will incur abuse, neglect, or abandonment due to disclosure to their parents, refer to the policy that then talks about mandated reporting?
Yes, I mean, I can't, because I don't have what you're looking at, but something akin to except as otherwise provided in this statute or this board policy.
Well, then we have to make sure the other policy is really solid.
Madam Chair, I think it'd be helpful, certainly as we uplift this conversation to the board, that the administration is prepared to impart to us exactly what the protocol entails. What troubles me particularly in the striking of administrator is relationship. This language kind of assumes an expertise over what also may be relationship relevant. Many of our administrators have rich and warm relationships with students in a way that they are trusted parties. Relationships with students in a way that they can be as supportive as needed. And again, they still are required to follow a very legal, required protocol, particularly when something about, anything from suicidal ideation to whatever is, alerted them about a student. So I think it's important that I agree, it should include any and all. But I think it'll be even more helpful to be equipped in knowing what it is, what our process actually is. I speak from experience in a different school district, but I think it's pretty much all the same, but I don't want to assume that either. It's not kicking the can down the road. I want to be clear.
We don't have a lot of time to kick it, so.
I just want to make sure that we are equipped with the information we need.
Can I share this paper with you? Because I passed mine down to Mr. Barnes. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I understand that the edit here is coming from a place of believing, the sort of wanting to respect the credentials and expertise and knowledge of a counseling or social work staff. I don't know. I mean, I think this is such a, serious topic, and, we've heard earlier about the risks of misstep here, and the impact on LGBTQ youth. So I guess my perspective right now is that if we're talking to start just about the issue of notification, I would be inclined to take the recommendation of the folks who have advocated for this, given that, we want to make sure that what we're doing is as careful as possible in implementing this law that requires broad notification of parents of all sorts of things. So I understand the need both to be flexible around how administrations speak with parents and students, as well as, in this issue about telephone or email, but it does strike me that there's other sort of harms to allowing these kinds of notifications to come about by email when we don't know how somebody's going to take it. You know, we want to use the support staff and the supportive services that our schools have to offer to the best of our ability.
Mr. Barnes, another piece that is in the second policy that I wanted to uplift is that there is language that says the request for a student to identify as a gender other than the one assigned at birth must be heard directly from the student, not heard secondhand or as a rumor from other members of the school. For purpose,
I'm sorry.
I am looking at the second sample policy from the organization, and what I'm looking at is C4C. I'll let everybody flip there. And that section says, the recommendation is language that says, the request for a student to identify as a gender other than the one assigned at birth must be heard directly from the student, not heard secondhand or as a rumor from other members of the school. I do believe that comports with my understanding of reporting from a student. Would you agree with the same?
I'm sorry, but I'm not prepared to give you a
Okay.
response to that.
Well, I think that's fine, but I think that would be a consideration for the board to think about too, is additional language in that vein that would comport with C4C, that further indicates and instructs our staff that the notification has to be heard firsthand from the student. It can't just be like something you heard in a hallway through chain of voice, right?
Yes, and as I read that, that language, I think it's attempting to address someone providing misinformation, perhaps,
Yes.
to the parent for whatever reason. But I'd have to look at the statute again to see if it's implied or it's expressly stated that it is the student. As I read it, my assumption was it was.
That's my understanding,
the
again,
student.
not speaking legal, I don't have the authority to do that here. So that is additional language that we can consider as a board, clarifying that, or we could consider as a board that that should be part of the instruction and guidance, because just because something is not written in a policy does not mean there cannot be administrative guidance that interprets the policy and gives further instruction to the staff, and that is something that I think would be important.
Yeah. Nope, I agree. I think it's important for us to know what the protocols are currently. Let's be informed with fact, and then, yeah, see where it makes sense moving forward.
Okay. Any other thoughts or concerns? Mr. Brown, you have something?
Just to the protocol. Part of what gave me pause there is many of our educators, well, most of our educators are mandatory reporters. And so there's not necessarily the stepwise protocol involved with it. I will definitely go back and see if we have some clarity in terms of that. But, you know, our teachers, our social workers, our counselors, our psychologists are all independent mandatory reporters and hence are obligated to make that report. So if we're doing something exceptional here in terms of requiring a protocol, I mean, we can develop one around that. But, you know, this, the example that Board President Cole gave of a custodian, I don't believe a custodian would necessarily fall in the mandatory reporter category.
Well, actually.
They do?
Every employee.
Okay. So again, then they would potentially report directly under that circumstance, not necessarily through a principal.
So when we're talking mandatory reporting, the obligations that you're speaking about are very different than what we're talking about here.
Understood, but the question had to do with protocol around mandatory reporting. And I'm saying when every individual falls under a mandatory reporting piece, it would not surprise me if we don't have a stepwise protocol in that, because again, individuals would be required to do that mandatory reporting. I will definitely follow up to get greater clarity around that. But this, I think, will be to your point, a different way of approaching a mandatory reporting issue.
So you actually do have an AG on all of the mandatory reporting, and it outlines what everyone's supposed to do and who to notify. My question wasn't about mandatory reporting. It was more just in general of crisis communication to parents. How does that work? Who's involved in that when we feel like more supports are needed? Are our counselors always involved? Who makes the call? Like, I think that's just helpful to know, not the mandatory reporting. I think we know how that kind of works. It's more of if it's not that. Because, again, this policy is for all sorts of things, not just this one issue that everyone came to talk to us about, which is incredibly important, and we need to know about that. And I think, like, the more I'm hearing more now about the mandatory reporting and some of the things we have over here, maybe we can weave some of that in, as was suggested. But now I'm curious about just the crisis communication part of it, when we are and who's responsible, and it's not new. Like, we do this every day, and so that's what I just want to know.
Happy to lean into that. Again, I think we're going to see some variability in that from building to building, but I'm happy to lean into that. This policy draft is not something that I've leaned into deeply, but I do wonder about conflict. Being a former counselor myself, do wonder about conflict on federal law around substance abuse and substance abuse reporting, which when I was a counselor, and this was a while ago, federal law prohibited me from telling parents whether or not a child under the age of 18 was having an emerging substance abuse issue. So again, another wrinkle to this when we think about the mental health needs of kids, substance abuse, mental health, and other things that are implicated in this as well. But again, I will be happy to follow up, and by the next board meeting, we'll have somebody prepared to speak to any standardized protocol that we have around that. Thank you.
And Madam Chair, just as a quick note, the reason I brought up the question and conversation around mandatory reporting is because that is really foundational to how this process could even be addressed. It is foundational. And it was really around answering the question of, if the concern is about a parent who otherwise brings some sort of hurt, harm, or danger to a child, informing them about whatever it is that could be a trigger for them to mistreat, neglect, abuse a child, then we have mandatory reporting, that process that allows us to bring third-party intervention, whether it's law enforcement or whether it's children's services. It allows us to bring that to bear to protect that child in the process of having to form a legal guardian, whether it's the parent or whether it's some sort of other legal guardian that has legal charge over a child. I just wanted to bring up that conversation just for that.
I think that that's right. I think it's important to consider and look at. I don't think, though, that statute is explicitly listed as an exception, which is the challenge, and where we as a board will need to decide, like our community has said to us, how we want to navigate this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just encourage the board to work with Mr. Barnes and sort of think through each of these exceptions. And even, we just heard about another sort of thought about federal law. I guess the question is there any law, state or federal, that protects a child from having information they share with a school, from having that disclosed to a parent? I mean, is there any kind of law that would help with that? There's none. Okay. And then the other point, I guess this all just makes us, to be explicit, it's like, right, this is putting children in incredibly hard situations, LGBTQ youth, heartbreaking to imagine is the situation that happens all the time, where a youth really needs the space to talk about their identity and how they're becoming themselves. And our schools should be safe spaces for that. And so I hope that as the board considers this policy, it also considers the guidance that's necessary to find ways to help educate staff and faculty, staff and teachers and students and everyone about, the implications of this. And, I'm thankful for the advocacy of folks here showing up. It's a really hard situation that y'all are in.
Can I keep reading that, I'm looking at this and I just, the risk of just sounding dense, want to ask some basic questions here on this.
What are you looking at?
So I'm looking at the Neola policy.
Okay.
And I'm, obviously this definition, the thing that jumps out at me is that definition about the student's mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being, and then D, right? That's the one that strikes the hardest in this whole policy, in my opinion. And so when you actually look at how this policy or how the law tries to operationalize that definition, then I'm looking later on into the section called Student Services / Mental, Emotional, Physical Health or Wellbeing Safe and Supportive Learning Environment and Parental Notification on the back top of that first page. And so, again, this is where I might be being dense here, but as I read that first portion, it concerns if there's a change in services related to all of that. So a student would, therefore want to be aware that if they are receiving services about that, then that triggers parental notification. In the second one, it, below that little break, it talks about any district personnel not discouraging or encouraging in any fashion that student to withhold that information from their parent. And then below it, it says it won't try to stand in the way of parental notification with regard to decisions affecting a student's mental, emotional, and physical health or well-being. As I sit here, I'm just reflecting on, I do not identify as LGBTQ, but I had a really rough period when I was in high school. And I just had this teacher who saw me. He didn't make any decisions. I didn't go to counseling. But it was just critical that I could be seen and that I wasn't alone. And I just think, I think I actually still see room for that in this policy in a way that doesn't trigger the ugliness of what many people would hope to happen. And I'm just wondering, does anyone else see that too? Maybe a student's not receiving services. Maybe there's no decision. Is listening a decision? Listening isn't a decision. I wonder if there's a way to really circumscribe those operative words in this. Like, what is a request? Let's be very specific about how a request could be made. Let's be very specific about what a decision is. Hearing someone, seeing someone, bearing witness to their existence and what they're going through doesn't seem like it requires triggering the rest of this. I don't think I'm being that inventive, but I'm also not an attorney, so I just want to put that out there for a reaction.
Thank you for sharing that, Kelsey. I do agree with that. I think, going back to when the legislature wrote this and the discussions I think that were had, I think it's fair what you say, and I think it's fair for us to consider that. I think, though, I think our schools are always going to be safe spaces for that because we have caring and loving adults that will see children. I think the challenge is when families and or students, I won't say families because that's really a disconnect, where they want to, for example, be called a different name.
Understood. Yeah, that's, yes.
That's where the challenge will be. And so I do want to uplift what you said, and I think that's incredibly important and so powerful. And I think exactly the heart of what I, as a board member, want for all of our kids. So thank you for saying that.
So just to follow on that, Chair, if I may, we can't change state law, right? That's not how this works. And so as I think about there's a lot of good in here, and I just appreciate all the community engagement around this. I think because we are handed what we are, and face just real limitations on what can happen here, is how do you make it abundantly clear? How do you focus on reducing the harm of it? You have to make it, therefore, abundantly clear to the student involved in this what is ahead of them if they ask for something. Whenever they're triggering this, I think that we really need to beef up that process, because if someone just sort of incidentally walked into it and then had a whole whirlwind of things happen to them, that's a real tragedy that I think we can all avoid, and that's what requires the brain power of the people here and the people in the audience and staff. So I guess that's just what I'm asking for here. I also, just in the spirit of harm reduction, building off the what was provided, I don't remember by who, but around this idea that actually a conversation, if it is to happen, if it is required to be, parent is to be notified, is there any reason why the district doesn't want to ensure that's done in a setting where resources and education about this is provided to the parents? Unfortunately, there's a lot of bigotry that still exists, and how can we use that, what is required, and build off of that to try to give that student and their family the softest landing as possible. So I would just say we can have a higher standard than an email.
I agree.
So I'll leave that there.
I agree. So, Ms. Branch, did you have some?
I would just like to say, Neola's policies generally are very much mirror the statute. This one is easy to do that because it says the board shall have a policy. The policy shall require the district to do all of these things. It doesn't say the board shall have a policy that handles this, and they handle it the way they want to. This is very, very specific, but still, there are moments when Neola puts their own language in, and it's in between things that are required. For instance, the paragraph that you noted, student services, mental, emotional, what you just pointed to.
Yeah.
The first sentence is directly from the statute. The sentence that says such notification will be provided by the students at building administration, not in the statute. So and I'm speaking for myself, Mr. Burns is general counsel, but I don't see, the statute says the policy shall specify what manner a student's parent will be notified of any substantial change in the student's services. And then Neola says what they say. That's their language, it's not the statute's language. Then it goes right back in the next sentence and pulls required language from the next paragraph under the same subsection. So you gotta read it like word for word, and I've done that. Generally speaking, the policy is you can put a section and a subsection right next to it. But that's a perfect example of a sentence that's stuck in there that isn't the statute. It's Neola's idea of what it should say. So, I mean, that's the kind of review that should be done, and make sure that where there's opportunity that, we can take advantage of that.
Yeah.
Did you have a?
I think that's kind of what I was trying to get at earlier, is that the law itself does not say who specifically has to be involved in the notification. It just says that the parent has to be involved because they would have to be the one notifying. And the administrator we're talking about should be involved to some capacity, knowing what's going on. But having a mental health professional or somebody who is trained in the field in social work, mental health, involved in that process and involved in that conversation may set that conversation up for success in the best likelihood. I do have still concerns about email notification of something like this, and maybe the email notification is, we need to have a conversation with you about something, right? Not exactly what it is. But then having that ability for that facilitation where the mental health and social work professional can use their expertise to set both our students and our families up for success when having this conversation. And I think that specific line is where we've got some malleability in the language itself.
And I mean, I think I love that, thinking that creativity, because when you think about the city of Columbus, if we're using some rationale, domestic violence as a whole has decreased by 7% since 2022. However, the lethality has increased. So homicides, domestic violence related homicides have increased. And the thing about the domestic violence homicides that have increased is it's not some more intimate partner violence. It's more relationship, whether it's parent and child, whether it's brother and sister. So when we take that kind of stuff into consideration and use it as rationale to build out this whole kind of concept, I think it makes a lot more sense and maybe justifies a safe space for this meeting, for a meeting that is for an email notification of the need for a meeting in a safe space with resources and those around who can help facilitate a much-needed possible conversation, because no one wants to come between a parent and child relationship. But we also have to think of the reality that not every parent-child relationship is healthy. And so.
I just have a question for legal. Is the inclusion of children's services, do you think that that inclusion in this policy language that Neola put in is kind of like a guardrail, and a guardrail that ensures the district is or maintains its fidelity to services for children in the school, like IEP services? If there are additional services provided by the district, that any significant changes, that families are alerted to that parents are alerted. Is it kind of like, is that language in there more as kind of guardrail language? I just wanted to be clear about.
It's not in House Bill 8. That language is not.
No, I'm not, I know it's not in House Bill 8. I'm talking about in the policy as Neola has drafted for us that you gave direct allusion to.
It's not in there either.
Or it's not?
But can it be?
It can be, yes. How the legislature will look at it, we don't know. But as it stands now, there is a statute that provides for that exception. Another statute that provides for that exception if there's harm or threat of harm to the student.
Yep, I'm just looking at student service, I'm looking at 5780.01. I'm looking at the section bolded, student services, mental, emotional, physical health or well-being, safe and supportive learning environments, and parental notification. The board will promptly notify a student's parent of any substantial change in the student's services, including counseling services or monitoring related to the student mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being, or school's ability to provide a safe and supportive learning environment for the student. Such notification will be provided by the student's building administration through email and/or telephone conference. Blah, blah, blah. I'm just asking, as this was placed in here, was it placed in here to give kind of more guardrail, more context, more substance to what it is that we should be responsible for in notifying parents?
Are you talking specifically about those words?
Yes, ma'am.
This is the paragraph I was talking about. The first sentence is straight out of the statute. It's the statutory words.
First sentence, yeah.
In
The first sentence is.
B2.
The second is not.
Okay.
Right. The second, about how the notification happens, you don't find in the statute. That would be
Gotcha.
something Neola decided to put in there, which they do. They sometimes put in there, and they'll put a drafting note that this is best practice. Or
Okay.
this is what most districts are doing. The third sentence in there is back to the statute.
Back to the statute.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So these require a very careful reading side by side with the statute to find those little things, because you've got 90% of that thing is out of the statute, but there's that one line that's not.
Okay.
And a lot of the NASW policy is very similar, albeit reorganized and differently, but a lot of it is fairly similar. Because we have legal constraints and there's law that you have to comport with. And so that is fairly similar. I want to try to summarize what our committee is saying and the instruction that I'm hearing that the committee would like to present to the board, and then be corrected if that's wrong. And if not, ask for a motion to go ahead and just make the recommendation to the board for consideration when the board is considering the policy at the next reading. What I heard is, the first thing is that this committee would like to understand if or how the board can include the administration in the notification process and make sure that the administration is aware of what's going on in its building. That the second thing, that the committee would like to include consultation and integration with counselors and social work staff in that notification process and the development of that plan. 3, that the notice is being heard directly from the student themselves, and that is what we determine a notice is, and that anything outside of that does not fit the definition of notice for purposes of triggering this policy. And 4, that the board consider language or guidance for when a student reports concerns that they'll incur abuse, neglect, or abandonment due to disclosure by their parents. And that would require us to understand current policy for when we have instances of mandatory reporting, and then thinking about how to integrate that language into this policy. Any questions or corrections on that front?
I think that's everything, like, technically for the board, but I do think Kelsey's statements about what things that I feel like would be more in administrative guidelines, which is written by a superintendent, I think is important to express to the board when you give your report, Chair Ingalls.
And in fact, if I can add to that, Madam Chair, if I'm not mistaken, I'm just getting older. If I'm not mistaken, when we first took a look at this language months back, right? And it was written to us in a different way. It had some really great preamble language. It had preamble language that stated our core value about our value of children, about, what it is that we're trying to do to ensure their safety, their wellness, their protection, how we regard them. Would it be helpful to have some preamble language and that goes with this section that says Parents' Bill of Rights? If we had something under that spoke directly to what our core values and tenets are with regards to the wellness, the well-being of kids. As I listen to you, that's kind of what really spoke to me. We need to say something on the front end that I think that demonstrates that this is something we definitely care about and place priority around.
And that's sample board policy 2, the second full paragraph, I think does that.
That's what I was gonna say.
Policy
Let me see.
example 2, I'm sorry, policy example 2, you're saying
Beginning.
where it says, the board is committed to ensuring that all of its students.
Yeah, just to
like that.
clarify, what was introduced in the first reading was this exact thing. But sample policy 2 does a nice job with the preamble that I think you're trying to get at.
Please, let's
One or
be
the
sure
other,
to
but
include
this
that.
is good.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay. So we're gonna raise AGs, and we'll more eloquently think about how I summarize what Kelsey
Play what
shared.
she, just like play it.
And then the core value statement. So with those 6 items, is there any other discussion that the committee would like to have in making its recommendation to the board? Hearing none, do I have a motion to make the recommendation to the board for the recommended changes to the policy and integration into it?
Move and I'll second.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion before the committee takes a vote to make those recommendations to the Board of Education? Hearing none, Mr. Williams, can you call the roll?
Ms. Ingles?
Yes.
Ms. Adair?
Yes.
Mr. Cole?
Yes.
Ms. Ellingson?
Yes.
Dr. Lunsford?
Yes.
Mr. Vogel?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. We will go ahead, the next two are pretty quick, so luckily. The next policy that this committee will receive and consider is Policy 7105, closing of school buildings. So our committee has done extensive conversation for the last 4 meetings about the closure policy and what we wanted to get out of it. And in some of those conversations, we talked about community engagement, what that looks like and what that should feel like for our community, and thinking about what are the factors that we're considering. What we took is the base of the current policy that is still in place today, and we added in community engagement guardrails that set forth what the superintendent shall do, with some guidance on not only what she should be presenting and the information that she should gather, but how many engagement sessions should occur, where and when they should occur, and those kinds of things. And so we did get some community feedback. I want to voice that it was 23 responses, so I in no means want to purport that that's wholly indicative of our entire ecosystem, but it is still 23 individuals who are tied to Columbus City Schools who took the time and effort to fill out a form after having read a building closure policy, and so I'm really grateful for that. What I would like to do is, at the board president's recommendation, take the feedback, and I'd like to discuss that here with all of you. And then I would like to recommend that we send this policy over to our academic and facilities alignment committee, so that that committee, which is charged with looking at how we operate with our facilities currently, that committee has an opportunity to not only receive the information about what the policy would do, but then think about it themselves and think about how they might make any recommendations back to us. So with the first part, I do want to talk a little bit about the feedback. This committee received the first 17 responses that I had as of last night when I was able to send you all the email. I will send you the rest of the responses, but one thing that I wanted to pull out is the factors that were considered. And I know we heard some public comment tonight about the policy itself and some things for community engagement, and certainly I'm going to go back and actually take better notes than the ones that I collected and hand those over to the Academic and Facilities Committee Chair, Board President Cole, so that when his committee is going through this, that they have that information and that is part of the information that is presented. And then also offer that I could do similar, if you wanted, to what I did with the Community Engagement Committee, which is last month. I went to the Community Engagement Committee, presented on what is the board closure policy, what is the language, and then asked for their assistance in soliciting and obtaining feedback from the community. So would do the same thing for your committee, if that's okay.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So I do want to share just a little bit about our feedback. Like I said, we did have some 23 total responses, 8 of those being parents, 12 being staff, 4 being graduates of CCS, 12 being supporters, and 3 designated as other. I do want to call out, one of the questions was, which of the following factors do you think should be considered by the superintendent and task force to consider when the task force examines potential closure of buildings? And most of them were very popular. So we had safety and access, relocation, burden, accessibility, aging condition, circumstances, and ability to maintain feeder patterns as some of the most popular and most designated as factors that should be considered. And then the least, we had 7 votes for location and site characteristics, 8 votes for space to accommodate choices, and 9 for future use, 9 for student enrollment trends. So those are some of the factors that were the most and least popular in the survey of what we have so far. There are quite a few suggestions, and I won't, for sake of time, go through all of them since we are going to be recommending this to another committee about why certain factors were chosen, and if there are any factors not listed above that should be included. I will go ahead and compile that and present that to your committee as well. And then as far as the factors that our community thought should not be considered by the superintendent, when the task force examines the potential of closure of buildings, the highest one that we got was student enrollment trends at 12, future use at 10, location and site characteristics also at 10. The question about which of these factors do you believe are important for the superintendent to incorporate into her public information and engagement sessions when a school is being considered for closure? Location of center-based programming was the most popular response. Locations of English language learners was the second most popular response, and concerns about the conditions of the facilities and major building equipment came in third. Status of district-provided transportation at each school within the region was the 4th most popular answer, and then concerns of inaccessible routes and dangerous street crossings between school within the region was the 4th, and then everything else was pretty far behind. So that was the feedback that we had. What I would ask this committee is that I will go ahead and make the motion that this committee grant the authority to transfer this policy over to our Academic and Facilities Committee for consideration, discussion, and a presentation on not only the feedback that we've received, but also a brief presentation on what this committee has considered to date, so that we can get the substantive feedback on the policy, and depending upon how the board president would like to do it at that time, and also candidly what we need to do within this district, either sending that to the board or back to the committee at the board president's required discretion. So that would be what I ask. Before I actually ask for that motion, any questions or feedback?
Yes, real quick. I know we've talked about this before, but in light of commentary that was made today, when we go to community engagement guardrails, we're talking about at a minimum, the superintendent shall discuss the following during community engagement meetings. Love the fact that some of the things that are made up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 additions that I'm hoping to add in some kind of way, discuss the impact on the budget that was brought up, as well as the rationale, clarity as to why. I'm sorry, am I going too fast?
No, you're good.
Clearly how it connects with the vision of Columbus City Schools. And when you talk about accordingly, the superintendent shall not fail to consider the documented harm school closures have had on communities, as well as shall not fail to consider the efforts made by CCS to reverse the decline.
Sorry, can you say that one more? The last thing you just said?
The last one, accordingly, the superintendent shall not fail to take in consideration the efforts made to reverse the decline. Someone testified as to how do we reverse the decline as opposed to focusing on.
Decline of enrollment.
Yeah.
Any other discussion or thoughts?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I note that the the factors that sort of listed as the most important. I mean, and it seems like aligned with some of the feedback is like people want to know how does this relate to educational goals and like the goals of how to build a successful school district. And so one curiosity I have is whether the framing is a little incorrect as to a school closure policy, which has come up in this discussion in the past, I think. So I mean, I don't know where the space is for us to sort of have a conversation about that, or what an alternative sort of framing of this could look like, such that it incorporates some of those sort of goals around including a plan for retention and growth.
Student-centered.
What?
Student-centered.
Yeah. I mean, should we, I wonder if we should sort of share some thoughts on that as we pass this over to the other committee, and how that might look.
So one of the things that my committee, if I may, I'd just like to read our charge so that folks understand what the Academic and Facility Alignment Committee actually is and does. The Academic and Facility Alignment Committee of Columbus City Schools Board of Education shall assist the board in ensuring the district maintains a shared vision of academic excellence that aligns curriculum, staff development, safety, and security measures, facility planning and management, and technology integration into support of our district goals, guardrails, strategic plan, and portrait of a graduate. The Academic and Facilities Alignment Committee shall oversee all the district's construction projects within the facility master plan and make recommendations to the Columbus Board of Education prior to vote to appropriate funds. So essentially, part of what's going to come in this, because we've already gotten a presentation, for example, on realignment and career academies with the district. All of this is tied to that vision, and then how do we actually flesh that out in a way that's comprehensive to us and in alignment with what the community has asked for. So I appreciate that question, and the gentleman, I don't know if he left yet or if he's still here. That gentleman who came up and talked about, what's the vision behind this? Where's the beef? Well, we're going to talk about that in this committee. Yeah.
So maybe we could sort of explicitly in the presentation of the committee say, hey, what we're asking for is your assistance in transforming what has been explicitly a school closure policy into instead something that's a policy about how to build a growth and retention plan and manage resources with our school buildings or something like that. I mean, I'm sort of thinking out loud.
No, great thoughts out loud.
No, I think it's great, because quite honestly, that touches on, and then I'll move on because I don't want to take any more meeting time. It really touches on one of the core ways in which we're going to kind of have a frontline fight against our cuts that are preeminent in the state, is reclaiming students and growing enrollment. And the more that we know positive and great about what's happening in the school district, the more that we're aware of the options that are available for academic pathways that are not just tied to what you learn here, but also tied to real industries in the real world. Now we have an opportunity to make ourselves a competitive creature that we really are, a competitive entity, organization that we are. So thank you, and thank you. Yeah.
I'd also like to thank you. I think that what we have seen and why we had to take up this policy is that 3-4 times this hasn't worked. And I think that it is about that reframing and driving towards vision and addressing things like the recruitment of students. And that has to drive why we're closing buildings, right? And so, or realigning or building, it has to drive all of it. And so I really appreciate that comment, and it's something I personally feel. And I think that the policy as written around just pure school closure is really not going to help us develop the kind of school district we need in the future. So I would also, I agree with passing those comments on over to AFEC, which I think is the best committee to really address then what the policy should have.
And I encourage the committee to, I mean, folks who have showed up tonight and provide feedback, let's make sure they all know about the next, your committee meeting so that they can continue
This
to share their
Thursday,
feedback.
in this building, 5:30.
Okay, this Thursday, okay.
You don't plan to take this up this meeting,
No,
right?
it won't
It'll
be this
a
meeting,
later-
full agenda.
Yeah.
Okay, so not this Thursday.
Not this Thursday. I was gonna say, wait a second.
You're like, we have plans already.
All are welcome, all are welcome.
Hold on. Okay, so at a future date, so our board committees do not meet in the month of July. The board may, if it needs to, but the committees will not be meeting in the month of July. And so the earliest possible opportunity that this could get on the agenda is maybe August, but I will defer to the chair of the committee. Okay, so with that, with the summary of recommendations, thinking about alternative framing, plan for retention and growth, considering the additional recommendations in the community engagement meeting piece, impact on budget, clarity, rationale as to why, connect to vision of CCS, and then the shall not fail to consider harms of school closure, consider efforts of CCS to reverse the decline. With all of the information that we have collected, I would go ahead and make a motion that this committee recommend that the policy go to the AFAC committee for consideration and further deliberation.
Second.
Any discussion before doing so? Hearing none, Mr. Williams, will you please call the roll?
Chair Ingles,
Yes.
Mr. Dare,
Yes.
Mr. Cole,
Yes.
Ms. Ellingson,
Yes.
Dr. Lunsford,
Yes.
Mr. Vogel.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. All right, our last policy on the agenda today is one that is not developed in our name, but one that does exist in other districts and is certainly a topic of discussion for all to be had. So, Mr. Lockhart, if you don't mind, I'm just going to kind of put you on the spot to come on up. But Mr. Lockhart, myself, and one of our librarians at Fort Hays, who came and testified before this committee last Policy Governance Committee meeting, have been meeting. We had a meeting to discuss the development of an AI policy, the necessity for the AI policy, and taking into consideration all of the things that are developing in this wild, wild west known as AI. We have seen federal discussion where there's the big, beautiful bill, whatever it is, that could potentially limit states' ability to moderate and pass laws that regulate AI. So the states are having to consider that, but that would not necessarily stop a district from having some kind of policy in place that could instruct how students, staff, and faculty could appropriately use AI in instances in which AI would not be appropriate. Right now, our district does not have specifically an AI policy. Some of the concerns that our last educator who came and talked to us raised were concerns around cheating and authenticity of the work. We do have policies in place around those issues, but they do not specifically speak to the types of tools that may be used in the classroom or the types of technology that may be used. And so in having that conversation as a group, what we came out of it with was kind of thinking through, is this a space for a work group to operate? And so we had kind of examined some of that. And then we examined, where do we need the policies? And what specifically do they need to say? And so Mr. Lockhart had brought forward some examples from the Princeton City Schools of 3 separate policies that he would recommend that we consider. The first just generally relates to AI and would refer to our policies, obviously, instead of their policy numbers. The second policy relates to student technology, acceptable use and safety, and then the same with staff technology, acceptable use and safety. So I'm going to stop talking because my knowledge of AI is limited. And I will actually allow our CIO, who has been working in this area for years and years, to kind of walk us through what are these different policies, what's your vision about how they could apply here in CCS, and what do you think development and implementation of a policy could and should look like? And then also uplifting the concerns of Courtney, who's our teacher, who's been working with us, that she would like to see some PD as early as the start of next school year, instructing educators and staff on best practices with AI. So how we might go about doing some of that. So I'll let you get started.
All right, sure. So I actually did prepare written testimony just to kind of create a framework. And I'll start with that, and then I'll come back around, and if I haven't touched on some of the things that you've asked, I'll come back and touch on that. But first of all, thank you for the members of the Policy and Governance Committee for allowing me to return and continue to speak on the subject of AI policy for Columbus City Schools. It was about a year ago in June that I gave my first presentation on AI policy for schools in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky. At the time, ChatGPT had been released 18 months prior and disrupted everything from corporate America to higher education to K-12 schools. In February of 2024, just keeping track of that timeline, which was 14 months after the introduction of ChatGPT to the public, Education Week published an article titled, "Schools Are Taking Too Long to Craft AI Policy, Why That's a Problem." So again, this was about 14 months after AI was introduced to the world in the form of ChatGPT. And I think for the sake of this testimony, we should take a step back and talk about what AI, artificial intelligence, is. And I promise I won't bore you, it's a very short presentation. But the word gets used a lot and is normally associated with what we call generative AI. I've used the word a couple times, that ChatGPT type of model, where you can ask it questions and it will generate an answer. But AI is much more than just the ChatGPT types. A non-existent list includes natural language processing. This would be your Alexa, your Siri, or your Hey Google. You can speak to the AI in natural language and it can respond in natural language. You also have autonomous systems. This would include self-driving cars from Tesla, Waymo, and other manufacturers that are working on that technology. It also includes those food delivery vehicles that you see at the larger airports that drive around and deliver food. Predictive analytics. These are used by investors to predict stock movements, retail stores to predict customer demand, and even weather forecasting. What makes AI different from other computer programs or models is that AI uses what's called neural networks. So I'm gonna get a little nerdy here for a second. These logic networks mimics the actions of a brain and how a brain learns by observing training materials and building strong bond references to those materials for later reference. Traditional computer programming was to just give the computer precise, explicit instructions to follow, and the computer could not deviate. Why spend the time to talk about this? I wanted to spend a few moments talking about what AI is, because as policy is being developed, there needs to be an understanding of what AI is and is not to prevent unintended consequences of developing a hyper-focused policy that may not only restrict the emerging AI models like a ChatGPT, but might also stifle the use of legitimate applications like iReady, Google searches, and predictive text on your mobile phone. While there may be a desire to create a comprehensive policy that covers all the possible scenarios, the challenge is that in an emerging technology that's already changed so many aspects in the last 2.5 years, AI is being embedded in an ever-growing number of applications, solutions, and websites. It is my personal belief that the Neola-style AI policy creates the expectations and some protections while not creating any pitfalls that may come back as the AI emergence toddler goes through growing pains. It may look completely different in another 2.5 years from now with these AI technologies changing and morphing, and any additional protections can be incorporated into an administrative guidance as opposed to the actual policy itself. The guidance is a lot more flexible and can be modified easier as the technology progresses and changes. So those were the prepared remarks that I had, and I want to make sure I answer or speak to some of the things that you referenced. The policy is one that's being used by other school districts also. So if you look around us, Worthington Schools is using it, some of the other neighboring schools are using it. And again, it kind of sets a guideline or a baseline for what's an acceptable use. The thing that I personally like about it, and the reason why I presented it to the board, is it gives that classroom teacher that ultimate control when it comes to student use of artificial intelligence. Surprisingly, Ohio State just made an announcement yesterday. This was not part of my prepared notes because it just happened yesterday, that they're going to be using artificial intelligence in all of their classes. So that's where we're at. We're at that point where we can't really, and I've used this term before, put that genie back in the bottle. It's going to become a competitive skill going forward. And I know it's a little, scary in some aspects, but that's why I wanted to take the time to just kind of roll back the veil a little bit. When you're typing on your phone, it kind of knows what you're going to put in next, or if you go to type your name and it pops it at the bottom so you can just click on it, that's an AI learning and developing. Same thing with your Alexa. So we're using these technologies all the time. I think the thing that we're really worried about, though, are those generative AIs, that a student will go to ChatGPT or something similar and say, write a paper on so-and-so for me, and it's capable of doing that. Or the art class will go to Photoshop, which has AI built into it, and generate an image that they will try to turn into their art teacher. So I think that's where we as educators are going to be the ones that are going to have to learn to adapt to this changing technology. And that's why I believe that the policy should say, thou shalt not cheat, thou shalt not copy, and if you reference something that comes from AI, thou shalt cite. Put those simple things in. As was said, we already have policy that talks about not being able to plagiarize. We already have academic integrity policies. So I think for the AI, we need to just define how that fits with those other policies as opposed to creating a whole different set of policies. And then following that, work with the administrative guidelines and use that work group to then produce and create professional development that both our staff and our students will receive on the proper, ethical, and successful use of artificial intelligence in the Columbus City School District, because the students are already using it, the staff are already using it. We just need to make sure that it's being used properly. Did I answer all of that? And then if you're any other questions,
so.
I've got plenty of time.
So, Mr. Lockhart, in our
Yes.
district, we do have a student technology acceptable use policy already. It is based off of the Neola policy. We also have a version of 754004. Ours may not be exactly the same number. Actually, they are exactly the same number. So we have both a staff and a student technology acceptable use and safety policy, which I don't know if they would need necessarily modifications based on what has been recommended, but we do not have this first one, which is the shorter 7540.09 artificial intelligence. And for purposes of numbering, I have no idea what we would have to number it in our system, but is it your recommendation that that we recommend, or that this committee consider making a recommendation to the board to include something like this, artificial intelligence, that is light on describing exactly what AI is for all the reasons that you stated?
It is my recommendation that we work with the experts that we have in the district to craft our own version of that. Again, those were just sample policies. Again, Worthington has their own sample policy that they've gone, and I'm sure you all are familiar with the policy where you kind of, pick your designation for certain options. And so again, we have experts in the district that can assist with writing that, but I just thought that Neola's was one from my personal experience that left that flexibility where we're not creating, there's that saying, rules are made to be broken. And so I don't want us to create a situation where we have people that are in violation of school board policy because we've created a restrictive policy that can't keep up with the technical changes, where again, a lot of those can be addressed in the administrative guideline as far as the proper use and the proper tools. And quite frankly, a lot more of the personalized education software that we'll be using in the future will have artificial intelligence in the background operating it. So once again, I don't want to create a situation where we're handcuffing ourselves and losing that competitive edge with other school districts because our school board policy says that we cannot do certain things using AI.
And what does, one of the concerns that was raised was the ability to train on acceptable use of AI.
Yes.
With our current policies, do you think that we have that current ability to train on that during PD?
I have not read all of the policies, so I'm trying to think of any policies that would prevent that training, and I don't think that there are any. I don't think we have any policies that says we are not allowed to do professional development on systems. So I think I'm pretty safe by saying no. I don't think we have anything that would prevent that. But again, I think that administrative guidelines, which are a lot more flexible, can speak to some of those things about developing that professional development. And if a year from now we come back and there's new AI that's doing something else, we can go back to those guidelines and massage those and tweak those to make sure that we are still being supportive of our students, protective of their data, and supportive of our staff and protective of their data also. Because those are my big things that I concern, protecting our students' data, protecting our district data, but also giving our students that opportunity to be competitive. It's the emerging technology, and again, I'll regress and say Ohio State has already said that they're going to be using it in all their classes. So next year, we probably want our seniors to have some structured exposure to this technology if the colleges are going to be expecting them to use them as part of their higher learning.
And when you say develop an AI policy, do you think it would be much more developed, and how would you recommend that development occur?
Sure. It's my understanding we have an expert on staff that works with the Neola policy. I would think that that person should be involved in crafting it so that it fits the spirit of Columbus City Schools. They're not that difficult. They pretty much have the types laid out. It's going to just be more of what we feel is the comfort level of our school district as far as how open or restrictive those are. So drafting it will, well, again, you guys are the governance committee. You kind of know that policy or that practice on a policy. It's going to fall somewhere pretty close to that recommended one because most of those things in there are options that the previous school district, we selected by reviewing it. I would think you'd want to go through that same review process here, again, with a lens for Columbus City Schools.
I think I know who our Neola expert is.
No pressure.
I don't want to speak for anyone else.
But Neola and OSBA within the last year have released AI policies. They're basic, they're general, they're meant to be broad, as Dr. Lockhart is saying. And so I think the weight of the work will be in the AG or whatever we decide to do. Because when something is ever expanding like this and evolving, we don't want to tie our hands.
Yeah.
Because then you've got to keep up.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to work with everybody on this.
Great.
That way you don't have to keep bringing me back to bore you and talk about
No.
AI and technobabble.
Yeah. Does this committee have any thoughts or concerns about the development of an AI policy and recommendation that the board consider in consultation with Mr. Lockhart and Kyle and our legal team, the development of a simple AI policy from which we can expand and create administrative guidelines?
My only comment is that I think there were some things that I put check marks by that I would love to see it include that are in the Princeton language. One is the professional development piece. I don't know if it has to be as specific as principals, but it would make sense that administration ensures that our staff get the proper training and development. Staff members shall provide guidance and instruction to their students regarding the appropriate use of district information and technology. So again, that kind of follow-up with staff gets it, they teach, they learn, and then they teach students on the appropriate and ethical use of it. Staff members are responsible for good behavior. So again, student outcomes don't change until adult behaviors change, ensuring that we have language that, so there are certain things in here that I put check marks by that I'd love to be able to see in any future policy.
Okay. Any other questions? Concerns, comments, thoughts? Okay. Hearing none, I will go ahead and make a motion that we ask Mr. Lockhart and Kyle to work together on a simple AI policy and additions with the comments from Mr. Cole about AI, and present that to the Board of Education for consideration and adoption. In addition, and ask to the administration to integrate some AI best practices into the PD starting this fall. Here, second, any conversation or hearing none? Mr. Williams, would you please call the roll?
Chair Ingles?
Yes.
Ms. Adair?
Yes.
Mr. Cole?
Yes.
Ms. Ellingson?
Yes.
Dr. Lunsford?
Yes.
Mr. Vogel?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. All right, that being our third policy for consideration, anything else from the committee at this time before we adjourn? Thank you so much for your time here today. I think we got a lot accomplished, and it was very exciting to have as much community support as we had today. Thank you so much for your work and your work that you did ahead of this meeting to prepare so that we could have an intelligent and thoughtful conversation. So with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you all.
Oh.